Very good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the MMA Webinar Series 2020 as we continue to bring to you curated and rich insights in collaboration with industry experts, marketers, and partners. Today's session is an MMA exclusive and is about recalibrating business thinking based on the consumer sentiment survey, which was carried out by MMA exclusively on and had been done on a base of 1200 plus respondents. The same is to empower the industry during COVID times with learnings and business perspective, which can help take prudent decisions as we open up and enter into Unlock 1.0. But before we get started, let me share a little bit about MMA with you. MMA is a not-for-profit global trade body focused on mobile marketing and encourages participation from across the ecosystem, be it the agencies, the marketers, the publishers, and the tech sellers. In India, we flourish with a similar ecosystem and have members from across genres. Our mission is to accelerate the transformation and innovation of marketing through mobile, driving business growth and consumer engagement. We largely serve the chief marketer and enable engagement from across the ecosystem, making it a win-win for both. We are essentially enabling our service, we enable the entire ecosystem based on 4 key pillars, which is on cultivating inspiration, enabling know-how, building effectiveness through business impact and measurement studies, and through advocacy like every other trade body. We enable the same through various programs which are carried out by our think tanks, through our awards platforms, and through our marquee events which run through the year. We believe that mobile is shaping the future. However, we are also very sensitive to the COVID times and hence have enabled a central resource to help and support the marketing and tech industry and maintain and drive sustainable businesses during these difficult times. That's our way of supporting the industry through the COVID Hub, which you can register by logging into the link mentioned on your screen, as well as you can contribute to it by writing into us. We do understand the importance of powering and enabling the industry with curated content during these times, and hence the initiative on enabling a consumer sentiment survey is in the same direction. Here is also a sneak preview of our upcoming webinars for the coming fortnight. As you know, we are enabling the industry with a series of webinars during the period and are ensuring that we are able to guide the industry with learnings, perspectives, and anecdotal references. We've also launched a playbook series, which is called There Is No Playbook for This, as we truly think that it's all about unlearning and relearning with the help of the industry coming together and learning from best practices, use cases, and anecdotal references. So do remain tuned in to our Friday series, which happens at 3 p.m. SGT. Our sessions are largely geared to deliberate changes that have happened at a consumer and media level and its implications as we shape the future. The programs we are running to enable the industry are flashing on the screen right now, and which you could also participate in the capacity of a member with us. Thus, it brings us to the webinar today, which before I bring in my panelists, I do want to share with you certain house rules to enable an interactive and engaging questions, an engaging session where we'd like you to ask as many questions as you want by punching in your question into that question window during the session. We will try and take as many of them live, and if we are unable to answer the questions mentioned herein, we will try and write back to you after consulting our panelists. What is important is that you share your name and your designation and company with us so that we can contextualize the answers for you. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our panelists today. So we have with us Rajiv Lamba, who is the founder of NeuroSensum and SurveySensum, and is also an MMA APAC member. They specialize in neuroscience and AI-based research and have footprints across APAC. His profession and passion lies in customer experience, and a book he recommends is Delivering Happiness as a Must Read. Let me introduce you to Arvind, who's on the MMA India board with us and is a director in marketing and communications at McDonald's India. He has 2 decades of marketing and sales experience across varied categories like QSR, skincare, fashion, automobiles, and has some extremely rich insights for us today. Vinay Bapna is the co-founder and CEO of Unimore, a leading digital consumer insights and market research platform. Their tools and technology is deeply integrated into the app ecosystem to understand consumer behavior in mobile environments. Vinay has 2 decades of experience and has worked extensively in the Silicon Valley. And with that, it brings me to Gulshan, who's heading advertising at Hotstar and is a digital veteran. He is also on the MMA India board, and I've had the privilege of knowing him for over a decade. He's been in the UK, US, and Singapore for a large part of his career journey. He is a comic book junkie, and with 3 kids, that sure does help. And myself, your host and moderator, Moneka Khurana. I'm the country head of MMA India. Whilst I have been in the industry myself for 2 decades, what we're going to see today in the consumer sentiment study is unique to its times and would be once in a lifetime for all of us. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Rajiv and Vinay to walk us through the highlights of the report, whilst I seek business perspective on the report findings with our panelists. Vinay, over to you. Yeah, Rajiv, can you take the lead?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me, Monica?
Yes, very clear.
All right, okay. So, Vin, if you can just put the slides there, I'll just, yeah, thanks. So just to quickly take everybody through the research that was done. So what you're going to see today is a mix of what is a consumer sentiment as well as a business sentiment survey. So for the consumer sentiment, we went to more than 1,200 consumers in India, which spaces around male, females, 15 to 64 years, metro as well as non-metro cities. So it's a massive sample that has been done. And the data collection partner for this particular research has been Unimore as well as Hotstar, thanks to them. At the same time, apart from getting consumer sentiments, we also did business sentiment, where we reached out to around 149 organizations just to understand how businesses are feeling at this point of time. So this particular analysis that you're going to see today is a mix of what consumers are saying and what businesses are mentioning. So it will capture both consumer and business sentiment. So this particular research was done around May. So it's a very, very recent finding that you're seeing. So let's go through the first section, which is how consumer sentiments in India are changing and how consumers they are feeling. So it's a very interesting slide where we have made some comparisons with other markets like Indonesia as well as Vietnam. So this particular slide, you will see that consumers in India are relatively more worried in comparison to Southeast Asian markets. So if you look at the data of the consumers who are mentioning that they're extremely worried is around 46% in India, which is relatively more in comparison to Vietnam as well as Indonesia. And we all know that India has been in a severe lockdown for a long time. It's slightly opening up now. But yeah, but consumers, they tend to be very worried in India right now. So Vinay, if you can go to the next one, thanks. So when you ask consumers how many months it will take for things to become normal, interestingly, in India, consumers are mentioning it will take 4 months, which means they are expecting things to be normal by end September or beginning October. While Vietnam, consumers are expecting things to become better by July. In fact, Vietnam is already opening up. A number of cases in Vietnam are relatively fewer in comparison to what India is seeing right now. In Indonesia, consumers are expecting things to be normal by August, while India thinks will be normal only by end of September or early October. This is what consumers are mentioning. Again, I think it's relatively longer road to recovery for India as a market. So when we ask multiple other questions to the consumers, are they reducing their spends? Do they think that it's impacting their daily income, or is it impacting their jobs? Which is again similar to the facts that you saw before, where consumers in India are relatively more worried. They are reducing their spends in comparison to the markets. The impact on the income has been relatively more in comparison to other markets. And the impact on the financial security is relatively more in comparison to other markets. So things are not that great. We all know that it will become better at some point of time, but at this point of time, consumers are definitely concerned about their own status as well as the financial status for themselves. Yeah, Vinay, hi. So yeah, Vinay, possibly you can take over from this section.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Rajiv. Thanks, Moneka. Really excited to be a part of this discussion today and talk about the research findings that we have, and obviously delve deeper into what the data means for businesses and brands, and perspectives from Gulshan and Arvind, I think, are going to be very insightful and meaningful. Like Rajiv said, so we're looking at a data of about 1,200 consumers, and it has representation from both the genders, all the age groups, covering metros and non-metros and income groups. So quite comprehensive, in that sense. And while we are sharing the high-level takeaways here and the data points on the slides, there is more detailed data by various cuts and segments that we will share when this report is shared with you as a follow-up. So taking on from where Rajiv left in terms of sentiment and talking a little bit about behavior, trying to understand, what do these changes mean from what consumers are going to do. Pricing being a big factor today, the price consciousness which has set in, we all know that is true, but trying to understand the quantum of this, we see 39% saying that they're much more price conscious than before. And this is the top box. So if we sort of measure this on a 5-point scale, if we look at top 2 boxes, it goes as high as 70%. So pricing obviously playing big on consumers' mind. Spending will be a lot more controlled and curtailed. When we have looked at certain finer segments, we see this sensitivity higher amongst women, higher amongst lower income groups, but uniform across metros and non-metros. And the way this is playing out is that 31% are actually ready to switch brands and look for alternatives to what they're using. And most interestingly, a large percentage, 73% of those who say that they are okay to switch are also okay to switch and stay with the new brands that they're choosing. So a lot of brand switching going on. It's obviously driven by the pricing consciousness that we saw in the data, but also I feel due to availability, because I go out and buy products, my brand is not available, there's a huge supply chain constraint, and I buy an alternative and I might just like it and I don't mind sticking to it.
So Vinay, let me bring in our panelists in here, to open it up for a point of view. It's very interesting that we see that the consumer becoming more value conscious and is also open to downgraded choices. That's a huge shift. So let me ask Arvind. Arvind, what's your take? What would you attribute this behavior to? Arvind, do we have you or have we lost you? Arvind?
Yes, thanks for that question, Moneka. Happy to be here and share my thoughts. So thanks for having me. So yes, we do anticipate this behavior, this pronounced behavior to remain for the next 6 months to possibly an year. And we believe this would be a widespread behavior going by some of the trends that we see from other countries. But in the context of eat out or QSR category, and some related categories, what I would like to point out is there is also the huge unorganized sector, which is non-branded, and the organized sector, which is branded. I think the primary driver for choice customer would be safety and hygiene in this category context, which kind of pushes them towards brands as opposed to the unorganized sector. But within the brands, yes, there will be customers will be seeking for more value for money choices, so to say. So that's one perspective. The other angle is on availability. I think more so than before, accessibility and availability is very critical. For example, again in the context of QSR, if you're not available for food delivery, you miss out that option, right? Because food delivery is so important now as opposed to dine-in. So I think brands have that challenge.
Did we lose you, Arvind? Arvind?
Yes, Monica, can you hear me?
Yes, I think there is a connectivity issue at your end.
Yeah, so essentially, in the brand tracking work we do, right? So the brand pyramids of awareness, ever tried, currently used, most often used. I think this is up for a major shuffle because people are going to try new brands, look for alternatives, either driven through price or driven through availability. And when we come out of this in a few months' time, how the brand hierarchies will stack up is something which will be interesting to see, and it's definitely going to be different from what it was.
I agree.
Yeah.
I actually want to bring in Gulshan here to understand if price consciousness plays any part in the category he belongs to, and does it really impact the way viewers make entertainment choices? Gulshan, what would your take be?
So I think there's a couple of things I would say first. I think the first one is, historically, us as marketeers, we used to say that there are 3 times in life when you make major life decisions, and that define your consumption. Typically, your first job, typically getting married, and then ultimately if you have a family or a child. And then those things are related to buying insurance, investing, buying a car, what kind of car, what kind of clothes you buy, etc. I think what we're seeing here is that whether by force or by just happenstance, COVID has become a 4th set of decision making. Like, it has disrupted supply chains, and people have looked at that. And I think that what we have seen, again, the data is very fuzzy in this case, is I work in a digital business where the supply chain or the delivery to the customer is completely digital. At the same time, a lot of our production is actually quite physical. We have to get people in a room to shoot, we have to edit, we've kind of figured out a lot of that stuff, but fundamentally, we're in the business of storytelling. And what we've seen right now is there's a huge hunger for entertainment. And at least today, we are seeing record numbers of people signing up for our subscription services because we've opened up new services on the back of it. So for example, I think some of you may be aware, but we originally planned to launch Disney Plus Hotstar on the eve of IPL, because obviously that's a big platform for us, both sports and family entertainment. And then when IPL was postponed, we took a few days to think about the options, what we could do. And we decided that actually now was the right time to give family-friendly entertainment to consumers. And we've seen a very good adoption of that. So, I mean, at least for us, we have done, our product today is actually a good fit for consumers in the current lifestyle. But it's not easy because even our supply chain has been disrupted given how we produce content.
Interesting point of view. So as we proceed, let's see some more business insights that we can get from our panelists and actually look at some more trends that have come out of this consumer sentiment survey. Yeah, Vinay, over to you.
Sure. So let's quickly look at what people are doing more. And like Gulshan said, definitely entertainment, lot of exercise, at home, everyone's at home. So there's cooking. So we can see that in terms of more purchase of things like groceries, etc. Definitely, higher health consciousness, so up by 24%. In exercise, we see slightly higher among women, those who are doing more and more, exercise at home. And I think if you think about it, there's a lot of convergence here as well. So, for example, entertainment is centered around TV, OTT, digital content, and how health and fitness content, cooking related content, and programs on these platforms are really sort of coming together to sort of drive that convergence. Similarly, with food habits, it's purchase of FMCG, groceries, and at the same time the impact on food delivery or the kind of brands people are choosing to buy just because of higher health consciousness and fitness consciousness.
Absolutely. Gulshan, tell me, we do see a huge spike in entertainment at home. And is this a habit which is likely to stay in the long term? What could it mean for a business like yours in the way you think content and the way you plan for it? Would you like to share a POV on that with us?
Sure. I mean, I think obviously there's a lot of changes that are happening. I think a couple of things that we've done now. I think typically we've actually broadened out our content. So people have watched Hotstar. Actually, to your point, Vinay, we are now actually hosting exercise videos. So we have specialists in yoga, specialists in mindfulness, who are now producing, I would say, shorter videos, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and producing that. And, I was looking at one yesterday, and a relatively straightforward conversation, straightforward video. I think within a few days had got almost 12 million views, which I hopefully choose to believe that it's 12 million people practicing yoga as opposed to
Wow.
12 million people, okay, watching other people do yoga. So I think there's a strong interest in that. At the same point in time, I think, we've historically made a big bet on cricket and sports events, which is obviously not on the platform anymore. Okay. And I think what we've seen is, I think that producing content for us, actually, let me just say that. So one is, what are people interested in watch? So we obviously seen that new categories like exercise, like health, are becoming much more wanted on platforms like Hotstar. I think the second thing is we have seen a shift to what I think people want and call make me feel good in these kind of varying times. So actually, if you looked at it over in that period of time we were doing the survey in May, our top 3 shows were all devotional, or not even devotional, I would say religious in nature. So Mahabharat, Sita Ki Ram, all those conversations and all those shows were actually becoming number 1, number 2, and number 3. Whereas in April, in sort of March time, they would have been in the number 10 to 15 kind of rank. Okay, so it's interesting to see how people's choices have changed. And I think fundamentally the question is, from a supply perspective and our supply chain, we are limited in terms of typically production or television content production. And at least the way we do it tends to be big shows, big sets, hundreds of people working together. I think very quickly we've figured out at least everything apart from the shooting aspect, how to get it into a virtual environment. I think the second thing is sports, we think is always going to be an interesting nation. And so as we start building up, hopefully some version of sports, we started thinking about how do you show sports in potentially an empty stadium? Do you, for example, start creating people watching at home montages to get that excitement, to get that feeling? Okay, it's much of an emotional touch. So we've had to change in a fairly fundamental way what we're creating and how we're creating it. That's pretty much it. Anyone else?
No, that's perfect. So let's proceed with the other insights we have today and get a POV from all of you as we progress and see the trends. Yes, Vinay. Vinay, on mute. Yes, Vinay.
Yeah. Can you hear me now, Moneka? Is
Yes,
good?
yes.
Yeah. So, no, really, what you said, Gulshan, about people wanting to feel good and feel good about themselves, and it's definitely not about buying clothes and accessories, because as we see down, that's a category which has gone down. There's certain other things, but here, what we see is that the COVID-19 has given an impetus to adoption of many categories quickly. So consumers who were laggards in adopting some of the digital services, or services that were struggling to overcome this mental barrier, in consumers' mind, now suddenly, they see a lift. So, things like e-learning, across, age groups, right from very young children, to others, online doctor consultation, up in the, range of 20 to 30%. So it's almost like, the whole household sort of sitting together, and everyone trying to, ask, how do I use this? How do I install this app? How do I register here? How do I get, information, about this, etc. And the interesting thing here is, when we look at the data, while metros obviously are ahead, non-metros are not far behind. So, in adoption of these things, they are pretty much, on the heels of where the metros are.
Sure. In fact, I remember, Arvind, when we were discussing these findings with you, you had an interesting take on how some of these services like online health consultation, online investment services are like a very unique, one of a kind trend which has emerged and is likely to stay. It'd be good if you could share a little more about your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, Monica, some of the underlying, if you look at the underlying story in this slide, it's all about convenience, right? So the same content which was available offline, you had to go and access it. There is, you spend time traveling and to and fro, and probably you have to book an appointment and so on and so forth. But all of this is now available at home. So convenience is a big driver, and we have seen that even in the context of QSR, where food delivery has been growing at a faster rate than offline dine-in. And this COVID, and because of the lockdown, extended lockdown, people inculcating new habits, one would see sustained growth and faster growth in online food delivery. I am particularly surprised by some of the aspects here, like online doctor consultation, right? This is one, one thing that customers used to be very reluctant to go and access doctors, consult doctors online. For them, it was something that they go and see face to face, right? Not something that they consult online. But I think because of the constraints during lockdown, people have been more open to seek online doctor consultation. So here, a lot of players would be hoping that this habit stays, because people have gotten a comfort with this particular service. And maybe online doctor consultation, which is very large abroad, takes off in India too, right?
Right.
So while I see some of the usual suspects that used to do well even pre-COVID, but there are definitely some new entrants here, and which is great for various kinds of industries and categories, as they become digitally enabled.
Right. That's really interesting. I mean, it sure is a very unique set of trends. So as we look at the next slide, Vinay.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where we looked at, what is down. And I think most of these are obvious, because the drop is either due to physical constraints. You can't go out there and use these services. You can't go out and eat. You can't travel. You can't go and watch movies. Or you are constrained because you can't access those products because of, supply constraints, etc., non-availability, those kind of things. But I think the key issue here, which, we really should delve upon, is how will these industries recover? How long will it take, and in what form? And that's where I feel that there will be many innovations which will come, down the road, and those will truly challenge the incumbents. So the new leaders that we see emerging in these categories are going to could be a totally different set of brands or companies in a totally different shape and form. And the other thing I think which is going to happen is that certain subcategories are going to break out. I'll give you an example, like consumer electronics is obviously, down, 48%, we can see it here. But there'll be certain, subcategories where we will see a surge. Now, if you think about the demand for tablets tied back to adoption of e-learning, or there's a very unique device called the UPS router. It's a special router which is meant only for the internets that we routers that we use at home, so that the internet can stay on while the electricity drops. So I think there are many subcategories which will suddenly, while overall they may be drop, but they'll see a surge because of the kind of things that people are now doing at home a lot more than they were doing earlier.
Correct. In fact, what I want to also call out in this trend is that we see eating at restaurants have a maximum drop, followed by QSR and then food takeaways. So, Arvind, tell me, do you think this is the pecking order for eating out in the new normal? Do you think it's going to sort of really remain? The pattern is going to be remaining in this in this space where there'll be more takeaways versus QSR versus restaurants. Is this the pecking order for the new normal? What do you think?
So yes and no, Monica. So for the near term, yes, delivery would be the primary channel for customers to seek out food, followed by takeout. As it happens, takeout or drive-throughs, as they are popular abroad, is not a very popular choice in terms of a channel, as we call it in the Indian context. So one would see takeout and drive-throughs really pick up in the next few months. And McDonald's is uniquely placed in terms of having the most number of drive-throughs in the Indian context. But having said that, there would be a large consumer segment across strata that would still prefer going to the restaurants when it's safe and hygienic to do so, right? So they might take their time. They might take 6 months. They may take 9 months. But they would definitely go back to eating at restaurants at some point in time when the dust has settled down. So that might happen at a certain lag, but the beneficiaries definitely would be delivery, takeout, and drive-throughs. And like I said earlier, there would be a toggling between brands and non-brands in this whole new context.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And yes, that's going to probably happen in a staggered manner. But now let me just pull in the audience for a quick poll. And as I launch this poll, which is about trying to understand how long does the audience believe the impact of COVID-19 is going to stay and what is the amount of time it will take to fade away. I want to pull in Gulshan. We just saw the last trend where there is also some element of a drop on consumer electronics. And this entire study was done in the month of May, which was like 15th May, the week of 15th May. So now with, we being in Unlock 1.0, do you think the demand for consumer electronics is just going to sort of reverse and you see more of it happening? Gulshan, let's unmute.
Hi, sorry. Just give me 2 seconds, sorry. I think there's a couple of things here. I think the first thing is, if you look at the number of categories that are going down, even in the short term, versus your previous slide, which is showing the categories going up, these tend to be bigger categories. So whether it's eating out, QSR, fashion, okay, is an important conversation. So the magnitude and scale of the decrease is actually fairly massive, okay? We're talking about, clothing sales going down by 50%. Okay,
Right.
we're talking about snacks going down by 13%. Now, normally, I suspect that snacks overall as a category would probably grow that much over a 2 to 3 year period. So what you're talking about right now is, in some categories, you've seen 5 or 6 years worth of growth disappear in a very short period of time. Now, Arvind's right, they're going to come back, but I don't want to underestimate the magnitude of the changes that things affect. So I think those are important conversations to understand. And then on top of that, given the brand changing that's happening, I suspect that, it's going to be a lot of turmoil in the industry for a strong period of time, maybe over the next 6 to 9 months, where there may be winners, there may be losers. So I suspect that when we open up completely, there'll be a lot of pent-up demand that has been artificially suppressed in laptops, in internet connections, in maybe high-end phones, or middle-end phones, whatever it is, that will come. But in the end, the bigger question I have is, we've gone through massive demand and supply shock, where firstly as supply comes back on, there'll be some pent-up demand. But I think your first few slides show massive weakening of consumer sentiment, where people are open to a more, I would say, value-based experience. Okay,
Right.
they may not choose to buy the high-end biscuit. They may choose to buy a medium level of biscuit, or buy one get one free types. And I think that's going to be the bigger conversation. Probably not now, but maybe in September, October. I'd love to hear from Vinay and Rajiv and Arvind about what they're thinking
Yeah,
about.
in
But
fact, we do have a slide where we will pull in views from the panelists, and it's very similar to what you just spoke. So we will come to that one. But in the meantime, I do want to share the results of the poll out here. And, like we see, a large part of them believe that it's going to fade away. It's not going to fade away in 4 months, and it's going to be a longer journey. Any views from the panel? Anybody would like to share or comment on it?
I
So,
think,
Moneka,
sorry.
go ahead,
Yeah,
Rajiv.
Rajiv, go for it.
Yes, I think I kind of echo the sentiments that the poll results are mentioning, that it's not going to fade away in the next 4 months. I think possibly, I think, again, it depends on sector to sector. I think in sectors like dine-in or restaurants or retail, what we have been seeing in other countries where the lockdown was released much earlier in comparison to India. So it might even take 6 to 8 months. In categories like aviation, for example, it might even take a year. So I think it depends from categories to categories, but overall, I think some categories might take an year to more than that, even 18 months to a large extent, to go back to the normal condition.
Rajiv, is regionally also the sentiment similar of it taking this long, or is it different?
I think regionally, like for example, in countries like Singapore, they are opening up. So the sentiments are far better. When I look at countries like Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, especially Southeast Asia, the sentiments have become far better to what we have been seeing in India.
Right.
I think possibly because in India has been a severe lockdown, which many other countries have not implemented, barring Singapore to some extent. And if you look at Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, they've been relatively more relaxed. I think that's why the sentiments are not that much hurt. And when I look at the magnitude of drop, when we look at the data that then we are seeing the declines. So the magnitude of drop in India is massive in comparison to what I've been seeing in other countries. I think one of the very interesting learning that I've seen in other countries, I think in sectors which had a huge drop, just to bring the traffic back, they have been very, very innovative, which is some of the learnings that possibly companies in India can adopt or adapt. For example, what I've been seeing in dine-in restaurants, people are looking at live kitchen. So they've been broadcasting the way they're cooking to show the entire safety measure that they have taken.
Right.
So I think so there's been a lot of innovation, but more importantly, the communication about that innovation, about being contactless, live cooking, talking about what are the measures that people are taking. I think that has possibly led to slightly better sentiments in comparison to India. But I like what Gulshan is saying. I think possibly has to driven a lot with the supply issues, not entirely because of the demand issues. You see, in India, I think there's been a lot of supply issues right now in comparison to the entire demand issues.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So with that, let's take a look at some of the insights we've garnered from a business sentiment study we did in India as well, which was done across 150 organizations. And can we have the next slide? Yeah. And what is interesting here, and it's going to actually also make a good slide for us to really, validate this information, where what we've been able to understand is that businesses expect a normal situation to be, at least 6.5 months away, whilst consumers expect it to be 4 months away. So I just wanted to ask Arvind's take on it. I did hear you say that eventually, they will start going out, dining out, etc. And that's how your business is also very linked to normalcy. So would you agree with a sentiment like this? What would you bet on?
So if I kind of react to this number of 6.5, and if the question is how long does it take for the category to go back to pre-COVID revenue levels, I think in the context of retail, generally speaking, I think the consensus is 12 to 18 months, right? I think because that is one of the categories that is deeply affected because of the current situation. I'm including malls, cinema halls, any destination shopping in the context of retail. There would be some parts of retail that would be quick to bounce back, but I think 12 to 18 months is a good number, given the fact that, for example, there are many services like salons, clinics, that would be even more impacted, while they are all trying to turn around their business models to kind of serve at home, be digitally available, and launching new apps, launching e-commerce. But I do think it will take some time for them to become accessible and for consumers to accept them back.
Interesting. Actually, I'm going to pull in Gulshan on this one. I do remember, Gulshan, when you and I were chatting, you did mention that the consumer sentiment is far more positive than the business sentiment. And that's what actually even the slide reflects. It'll be great if you can elaborate more on that one and tell us what your view is.
Yeah, I think consumers are looking, I think, in two things, which is one, when can I personally spend? And maybe they're projecting out a view of what is normal, which is this. But businesses, I think, are looking at two separate things, which is, forget airlines. But if I am a restaurant, how do I serve, that many plates I used to serve versus in a certain period of time? Suddenly, my cost of efficiency of real estate becomes more than double. In our case, what we've seen is producing content. It is taking us probably 2.5 times longer to produce the same amount of content than we did pre-COVID. Okay. Now, there's two ways we can think about that. One is we'll obviously get better that way because we just started in some states like Karnataka, we started producing content again, and we'll get better at that. But I'm not sure that with restrictions in place, we'll be able to get back to our same level of efficiency and productivity. So what you're actually seeing is, I think, 2 or 3 different things happening at the same point in time. One is, how do I get my goods to the consumer at the same point, at the same value proposition I used to get before? So my value proposition has to change. I think the second thing is, even in cases where my digital delivery of business or is much more digital, or my delivery business is not that impacted, okay, I physically can't sell that many more products because only so many people can go into shops. Only so many people can deliver food to me or deliver e-commerce goods. So therefore, I actually have to make my profit off, or frankly, just break even, off a smaller number of SKUs or units. So you actually have a lot of different views around, will prices go up, will prices go down, what's the value proposition, is demand for my product is there. It's a very fluid situation. I think, most of us are in the business side of trying to figure out what does that mean in the long term. In the short term, I think until the value time, we are okay operating just to optimize. But I think as you get into a 12 to 18 months scenario, like Arvind or Vinay were talking about, your fundamental value proposition has to change. And at least today, what I can see is across most of my client base, it's looking more expensive to do business than before. I don't know if Vinay or Arvind, you agree or disagree.
Yeah, no, so actually, so that, Monica, there are 2 points I wanted to bring out.
Yeah,
one is actually
sure.
from one of the attendees. There's a question, which says that Parle is showing a massive increase in the sales of biscuits, but our data obviously shows snacks down, as a category. So, I mean, going back to my earlier point, that I think our definitions of categories are gonna get revised, because within a category there'll be certain products or class of products which will sort of break out and create will get a lift because of certain things, like biscuits, maybe consumers buying more and stocking up, etc., as we've seen, whereas certain other snack types, like let's say maybe chips, or I don't know, maybe other types of products, maybe down, right? So like in electronics, we've seen that broadly as a category it would go down, but tablets, because e-learning is going to have a big lift, is going to go up. And certain devices, which sort of are aligned with what people are doing more and more at home. Now at homes, everybody, all 4, 5, 6 people who are at home, each need to have a screen of their own, to be able to do things. So I think within categories, there are going to be a lot of, subcategories which will emerge and break out from how the overall category trend is. My other point, and really a question, is, to Gulshan as well as Arvind, is, there's some bets that, companies would have taken, right, at the start of this year. They would have planned certain strategies, go to market, distribution, real estate. So there's certain big bets which, companies obviously take every year. And I think that is almost going to be sort of critical for them in terms of what bets they took and how those bets have played out in this scenario, because this is a very short window where within a month things went topsy turvy. So what's the implication of the bet that you took early on last year or early this year?
So, Vinay, we did have to, readjust our playbook, and it's sort of one-time readjustment. We had to continuously readjust it depending on how the scenario played out over the last 3 months. But safe to say one thing, we recognized quite early that based on the learnings we had from some of the markets which got impacted before India, that food delivery would be the number one beneficiary. So we invested behind food delivery, and we revamped our new app. We launched a new app, much improved UI UX. Got very good reviews from customers. The second thing that we digitally enabled is takeout. Compared to the what is available in some of the other advanced markets, you could now pre-order a McDonald's, and then go to the store and pick up your food, right? Rather than going to the store, waiting for your order and then picking it up. So we kind of made enabled takeout on our app, and that's been launched some time back. So we have been pretty aggressive behind these two channels as opposed to the dine-in, which is the third channel. So we had to readjust our playbook. The other one is in terms of media choices, right? Clearly, we see the acceleration towards digital as a medium increasing basis the consumer preferences. So we are over investing on digital compared to the traditional media. So we had to readjust our playbook in a couple of ways like this.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar position to Arvind, which is, look, being part of Disney, we also understood that our Disneyland Shanghai and Hong Kong was shut down much before it started hitting like India. So we had a sense of the disruption that we could see. Mobile phones, for example, started being disrupted because China is a big source of supply of those kind of phones. So we had a sense 2 or 3 months ahead of time that there would be a significant amount of disruption. From our perspective, I think some areas we've doubled down on, some areas we've kind of held back. So I think our belief is that OTT and people would continue to prize that. So we launched our new products like Disney Plus Hotstar pretty much on time and doubled down on that. I think some parts of the content space like sports we couldn't deal with, and we've delayed that, and we've kind of relooked at some of those investments in that area. And I think finally, we have also been a beneficiary of advertising. Okay, so as advertising has moved down towards a digital medium, I think it's not a wrong statement to say that in the downturn, we were probably not as negatively impacted as, let's say, TV or definitely print. In fact, if I look at this month, I think we're not that far off where we were in March, okay? Which is a pretty interesting place to be in most environments. And we think that there's an opportunity for us to grab market share. And the question is how
In
to
fact,
do that.
Gulshan, in fact, we do have some interesting insights where we'll want to come back to you on a POV there. It's pretty similar to what you're just going to share with us. So I think we'll just hold it for a bit till we get to that slide, which is just one slide away. In the meantime, what I do want to talk about is the next slide we have here, where we see that hiring and BTL is hugely impacted. And yes, there's of course, there are obvious reasons, there's cost cutting, there is advertising freeze. But what I do want to bring up here, and which really can make an interesting POV for those who are listening in, is sales promotions budget should ideally be on the rise and not cut, because everyone's been struggling to sell inventory. Everyone's had business growth issues, and sales promotion is a great catalyzer. So why would sales promotions budget be cut? Arvind, would you like to share some thoughts there? Arvind?
Yes, Monica.
Yeah.
So I think it's also a reflection of when the study was done. I think at the time it was a lockdown, which meant that companies were grappling with getting the goods to the consumer. Right? It was the supply chain was going through a massive disruption, so to say. So in that context, serving the current demand was a big challenge, right? For most companies, I would imagine. So it was not really about demand generation, which could
Yeah.
be the primary objective, I would say, come a July or an August or a September, when the market has opened up, when the supply chain disruption is largely being controlled. But then the task would shift to actually generating demand. And I would connect this to some of the slides presented earlier, where people are looking for deals and people are looking to downtrade. So I think to make the value for money proposition stronger, these elements would come into play at that point in time.
Yep. So
Interesting.
Monica, if I can
Yes.
just
Yeah,
add a
Rajiv.
point of view
Sure.
on this.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So just to give you a comparison of other markets, we saw very similar data in Vietnam or Indonesia 3 months back, where budgets cut were taken on sales promotion. But when we repeated this exercise around in May or mid or May end, companies are doing far more promotions in comparison to before. So I think if you look at that perspective, given that India is just getting out of the lockdown, possibly if you have to repeat this research a month or 2 months down the line, you will not see this kind of data. You will see companies doing far more promotions because supply will be corrected and there will be demand, like what Arvind mentioned. So I think it's only because there've been lockdown going on right now, and it's going to be very, very different to 2 months down the line.
Sure. I hear you. So as we move to the next slide, where what we see here is exactly what I will come back to Gulshan on. We do see that there is a lot of optimism around digital spends. There is, and it's increasing. Whilst, of course, digital spends by itself is a very broad opportunity here we're talking about. So where exactly are the digital investments going to be, and what are the platforms which will be able to cater to it the best when the skew is happening to digital spends? Gulshan, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, look, I think obviously the big two areas are people looking at e-commerce as a significant channel now. And, Arvind and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, and, people who had e-commerce channels are scaling them significantly. I think there are people who are more, I would call digital newbies, who didn't have much of a channel, and they're working very hard to figure out how to build that digital channel. I think search is always going to be an interesting part of the mix, where you're trying to find people who are pretty much at the bottom end of the funnel. We've obviously seen a big impact in brands that would consider us from a platform point of view. So we've seen a fairly strong belief that people are watching shows that we've done. I think actually we had done something, the Barker something, which is show that 10 of the top 12 shows on OTT were actually on Hotstar, which is a Disney Plus Hotstar, which is a good place to be. So I think it's across the board. I think video is growing fast. I think that e-commerce channel sales are going fast. I think another area that we haven't really thought about is the role of influencers. Okay, and the role of social media influencers is becoming a fairly important topic, because in ability where I actually cannot create an ad, I actually cannot get 40 people together and make a spot. Okay, the fact that I can reach out to half a dozen opinion leaders and drive them to create a new ad or a new narrative helps me drive my efficiency a lot. So, I mean, I think all of these are there. I think I will only want to say one thing, which is if you go back one slide, somebody, I think Vinay, this is your take. Okay.
Yeah.
And I keep saying this in that last piece, which says 19% of users or respondents say no significant cuts or postponements happening. I put it the other way around. 4 out of 5 businesses in India have shut down or cut down spending in a significant way. And I think that's a fairly big change. I would challenge anyone to go back more than 30 years, 40 years, before you saw that level of cost cutting across the entire business. And I'm trying not to be negative here, but I'm just pointing out that there's very few cases where 4 out of 5 businesses in an economy are saying that I'm going to see significant cuts or postponement in investments, hiring, etc. So that's why I think we're talking about 6 months before we get back to normal and 12 to 18 months. So efficiency is always a big thing. And if you go back to the next slide, sales promotion will come back. I agree with Vinay and Arvind when supply chain issues are sorted out. And I think what you're seeing right now is digital is growing, e-commerce is growing, ads are growing. I think there'll be pressure on print. I suspect radio will have a interesting opportunity where the narrative has always been around the commute, and if the commute, few people are commuting, what does that mean? And television or cinema-based advertising is going to be existentially challenged. I would argue.
Sure. Let's bring in Arvind here just to understand from a marketer point of view, how different would your digital strategy look in context of the current changed dynamics and heightened consumption in terms of digital time spent? What would you do differently? And if there is a piece of advice you had to give to those listening in, what would that be?
Monica, I think connecting it also to what Gulshan has been saying, I think it's very important to see the current context not as a pause, but as a disruption. I think it's very important for all of us to recognize that. And when we say disruption, we mean disruption in consumer habits, disruption in the business models. And that context is very important so that we do the right thing from a marketing strategy perspective. So with that context, as far as McDonald's is concerned, we have been, putting more money on digital, and I would say, if you look at our peers, we have been far ahead of the curve in terms of doing that. And one needs to only double down on that, and that's what we have been doing. So embracing new platforms, new age platforms. Gulshan mentioned on the go music. So Sawa and Geo, those kind of platforms where they have been doing well, but they would grow even faster. So embracing this new age platforms, digital platforms, is going to be very, very important. I think it's also about trying them out, doing pilots, and then scaling up fast. We found that quite useful tactic while embracing these new channels. While traditional media will not go away, and we have seen, for example, some kind of content doing very well on TV. So TV would remain in that sense, but I think a larger share, it's safe to say, would go towards digital. I wonder though, some of this media like print, how they would recover, in what shape they would recover. So that's a question that remains to be seen. And my kind of tip to marketers out there is relook at the business model, relook at consumer behavior, because 3 months under lockdown is sufficient time for consumer behavior to change and new habits to be inculcated, and then reassess the media from that perspective.
Fantastic. I think that really recaps it well. In fact, on that note, I do want to launch a poll and, open it up to the audience, which is also a mix of practitioners and advertisers, to really understand what do they think about digital marketing spends and what is the percentage allocation going to look like for organizations. And let's see how much that syncs up with what you guys have been telling us and, what your experience has been. And maybe we can open it up for another POV as well. Of course, I'm very conscious about the fact that we have very less time. So from a Q&A standpoint, we may just take one or two and we will have the rest answered offline. But we will try and at least close on the key discussion points. So here it is for the panelists. The results are on your screen. As you can see, that we see that it will increase. Most of them say it'll increase between 31 to 60%, close to half of them, and the rest, and the second chunk being in the 30% range. So clearly the current trend, which has been in the range of 15 and 18%, is clearly moving to 30 and upwards. Any comments there?
Well, I'm surprised to see the low numbers on digital. I would anticipate that to be growing even faster. In my head, 20-30% increase is in the context of pre-COVID. But now I think it would be, people talking about doubling the digital spends.
Right.
But it's not just about doubling spends, it's also about doing the right thing on digital, right? The footprint of many brands are not good enough to do good digital work. So I hope when brands are also increasing the digital spends, they're doing quality work on digital, they're doing the right thing on digital, and so that they get the right ROI.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the question really here is this. The value of digital is not just about reaching users and stuff. It's also about being able to segment, being able to understand what the user is doing online, and also being ultimately use it as a channel to deliver your product. And I think what you see is like people like Arvind who had, really good supply chains and really good sort of, abilities to leverage digital. And I remember like in the middle of lockdown, I think McDonald's was the only thing I could order for like a long 2 or 3 week period of time. And that was the treat for the family, is someone who can scale up. Okay. But if you don't know what your customer is doing online, because you don't have a good CRM, if you don't know, you have to spend money building that kind of infrastructure first, or work with somebody hopefully like us that can give you that kind of insights in terms of what our user base is doing online. So it's not just about spending money in digital in a similar way to TV. I think it's about segmenting. It's about, different messaging to different people in the funnel. It's about what your online experience, when you take them to your site or your app, what are they expecting them to do? Those things aren't small things that you can just quickly turn on and off. It takes, I suspect, a year plus, between 6 months and a year to build that kind of capability. If you're
Couldn't
new at
agree
it.
more. Couldn't agree more. In fact, yes, this is one time and it's important to give out this message to everyone who's listening in, that having a pulse on consumer insights, consumer habits is more important now than ever before, because it is continuously evolving. It is showing newer trends, newer behavior patterns, and shifts in media being consumed. With that, what I do want to do is definitely take one question, before we can wrap up this conversation. Also to tell everybody, everyone's been asking for the report and the recording of the session, which will be made available post the session. We will try and answer your questions offline since we are running out of time. But the question that I'm going to ask, maybe Arvind, you could take a crack at it, and Gulshan and Rajiv, happy for you guys also to chip in, is do you think e-commerce penetration into rural and semi-urban India would surge? Any pointers to that? This is coming from Gautam Mishra.
Definitely. Sorry, Rajiv, you want to go ahead?
No, sure. You go ahead, Arvind.
Yeah. So definitely, Moneka, I think Gautam's question is very valid. You will see a surge in e-commerce, or at least I would say broadly digitally enabled orders, right? Really surge in the small towns. The base is very small, but I think people, even before COVID, we were seeing the impact of geo or the data-led revolution that's happening in the Indian context, which makes data quite democratic. On that foundation, you have this disruption. Definitely, you will see a big surge in digitally enabled orders, not just in metros, but I think in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 markets. And this is a golden moment for e-commerce, right? There has been a time when e-commerce had huge aspirations, but the growth has been much slower than anticipated. This could be that golden moment for e-commerce to really capture a share of many more categories than what it has been doing today.
Sure. I think just to add to
Yes,
what
Rajiv.
Arvind is saying, so I think I believe that the potential is definitely there. I think before even it goes to rural, my thought is about semi-urban or secondary cities. I believe possibly the onus lies on the e-commerce companies. I think my belief is that they will go there once they want to look at the new battlefield or possibly change the goalpost, which has been very urban till now. So I think I agree with Arvind that there's a lot of demand in semi-urban or secondary cities or even rural. It's a matter of how much companies are willing to expand at this point of time to go to those cities.
Interesting. Any other inputs on?
I will just jump in. I think there's a
Yes,
couple of
Gulshan.
questions
Yes.
right now. One from Rahul
Yes.
Padia and one from Candice, which I think is semi-related. How is a campaign on vocal for local going to impact brands? And then somebody saying, Candice is joining from South Africa. what learnings would you say India has to share with other emerging markets like those in Africa? What I would say, I think two things is you always have to be relevant, okay, to the needs of your consumer. So if there's a view that consumers want to do, something that's a bit more local to their needs, then I think you may want to, play up those points. I think, I would say McDonald's has done this very well with the localized menus. And I think it changes not from country to country, but from south to north and east to west in that part. So I think, whether it's vocal for local or whether it's about just having a more differentiated supply chain or being able to solve for your ability in different lockdown parts in Bangalore versus Mumbai, where I am, okay, you'll always have to kind of solve for that. And for some users, that may be very important, but I think in the end, people can think two or three things at one point in time. For Candice, who's talking about joining from South Africa, I would possibly say that India's probably gone through the most stringent lockdown in the world, okay, bar none, okay, possibly with the exception of Australia and New Zealand. But, and I think this is probably as big as disruption you can get. I think it is important to understand that this is a big change in this is a disruption. This is not an evolution. And I think the other thing is, in the first 3 or 4 months, you're dealing with supply chain. And then you're talking about, in the period 6 months to 1 year, you're talking about thinking about how to develop new business models and that impact on your profitability. And then you're talking about demand getting back to normal. So we have three waves of stuff going on. Okay.
I think you recapped it very, very well for us. In fact, that helps me close this session in a very effective way. And, also in the interest of time, whilst there have been some extremely interesting points of views, and we would want to have maybe another round of discussion when time permits. But at this point in time, I'd like to close the session. I'd like to definitely say a big thank you to our partners, Neurosensum and Unimore. I do want to thank our panelists, Gulshan and Arvind, for making time and helping us decode this valuable report, which is an MMA exclusive. Whilst the detailed report will be made available to all the attendees and all those who've registered, we would like to bring this webinar to a close here. And I'm sharing with you a snapshot of the upcoming webinars scheduled for June, with us entering Unlock 1.0. A lot of these webinars are very curated and helpful for businesses to be able to deliver better on various outcomes and to prepare better for what's coming their way. Like Gulshan said, it is disruption, it is not evolution. And hopefully these webinars help you gear for it. So, and lastly, I'd like to remind you of the ways in which you can remain connected with MMA. You can subscribe to our newsletters, you can follow us on our social media handles, and you can participate in some of our programs mentioned on the slide. We'd like to thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned with us for more that's coming up as we help you shape the future. Thank you, and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Pleasure to.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you for joining.
Bye.